in March 1850, he actually is baptized a Latter-day Saint. He's baptized by Isaac Morley, with whom he founded the Manti settlement, and he leads a few weeks later leads another 100 of his own followers, Wakara does, into the baptismal waters. And so he's a baptized member of the church, and a year later he becomes probably the first ordained native person in the priesthood. So the Mormons see him as a partner in their building of Zion, in their partnership in also bringing native people into their community and making them, to borrow the phrase that's no longer in the Book of Mormon, but was at the time, white and delightsome.
It is time for another episode of the Cultural Hall, and I am excited for this episode. Max Mueller is here, and we are going to talk about something that I do not feel like we talk enough about, and that is the Native American people and their interaction with the LDS Church, who some of those people are. We hear names of people, and I think we just sort of put them in buckets and go, oh, maybe one day I'll learn about them. Well, today is the day that you are going to learn about. And we chatted about this before we started recording. Wakara, or maybe not even pronounced that way. Welcome in, Max.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes. Wakara. One of the things we've lost is his name, and he had many different names in the different locations, because he was such a he was the most traveled man in the 1840s, and a Ute leader. In the 1840s, Ute as in Utah, centered his homeland, centered around what is now Utah Lake, and known here in the Salt Lake Valley as Walker, and most among the Anglo speakers as Walker. In California, he's named was known as Wak, sometimes W-A-K, and then Wakarer in the northern New Mexican outposts, where he also frequented during the 1840s. So a really fascinating character who has a really important relationship with the Latter-day Saints, which I'm excited to talk about based on my new book, Wakara's America, that came out this month.
So when we talk about this, I think that there are many probably who are listening to this who, if you've been in the Salt Lake Valley, you've been up around the University of Utah, your only connection to this is that there is a street named Wakara Way, and you're like, oh, you turn right on Wakara, and then you can go up to the Huntsman Cancer Institute and some other, things that are up that way. That's it, and that is a shame that is what it's been reduced to. So I am excited to learn about this individual and be able to know just how dynamic as well as like pivotal for the American West and the Saints here in the Salt Lake Valley.
Yep, terrific. I'm happy to do that.
What made you decide to write a book about this? You are in Nebraska, if I've tracked you right.
That's right. I'm at the University. I'm at the University of Nebraska. I'm a professor here in the Department of Classics and Religious Studies. I'm a historian of American religion. I started learning about Wakara while I was at Harvard doing my dissertation with the great and good Laurel Thatchell Ulrich of Well-Behaved Women Seldom Make History fame, and David Holland, who is a professor at Harvard Divinity School and part of those Hollands.
Yes,
Elder Holland's son. Though he's, of course, his own person and his own scholar.
Sure.
So I've long been interested. I was born in Casper, Wyoming. So kind of in the Mormon world. In fact, though, I got really interested in Latter-day Saint history, and actually less so Latter-day Saint history, but Latter-day Saint culture, and even though I'm not a Latter-day Saint, sometimes I hold up a beverage when I'm presenting to kind of signal my non-memberness.
You're like, oh, that coffee's real good, and everyone goes, oh, okay. Yes. So not a member. Yeah, you can say it without saying it.
Exactly. Although, in the book I have mentions where Parley P. Pratt is drinking coffee, right? These things change.
Sure.
The word of wisdom and its different iterations and practices is that's another history. But I was my mom and I moved from Wyoming to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which is not the home of a lot of Latter-day Saints, but a home to some. And she was going to grad school there. My parents split, so it was me and my mom. and that was going to grad school there. And my mom was going to grad school in Chapel Hill. And there are a lot of Latter-day Saint families whose parents, mostly fathers, but not just, whose families were also going to grad school in our little, neighborhood of small apartments.
Hmm.
And boy, were they like, I became playmates with a lot of Latter-day Saints. And I really admired and still do admire that family dynamic, right? The appreciation and dedication of families. And one particular family had a kind of knew that my life was a little bit sometimes difficult as an only child of a mom going to grad school, and so they always had a place for me in their homes and at their dinner table. And so, without knowing it, I participated in a lot of Monday home evenings and
Hmm.
family nights, etc. And so I had a long kind of standing fascination and appreciation for Latter-day Saint history. Um, and also another, just very briefly, I don't know if your reader or listeners would know about the Great Brain series of books that take place they're young chapter books that take place in turn of the century Utah, like late primary school aged um, student kids read these books, and it takes place in what is a kind of a fictionalized Cedar City
Hmm.
around the turn of the 20th statehood. Anyway, but the story of those is that there's a young narrator who is narrating the activities of his older brother, the Great Brain, who's this precocious kid. Now they're actually not Latter-day Saints, but they live in this Latter-day Saint dominated world. And I was just so fascinated with kind of the pioneer and later aspect of Utah and Mormon history. And so when I was in graduate school, I was really interested in picking up some of those questions and looking at how Mormons, Latter-day Saints, understood the concepts of race and race kind of writ large, right?
Hmm.
And both kind of, and Latter-day Saints have interesting and challenging relationships to those questions, not only with people of African descent, obviously, but also Native Americans.
Sure.
And so my first book that came out of my dissertation is called Race and the Making of the Mormon People. And it was a kind of a study of early Mormon conceptions and relationships around race and racialized people. And one of those people, when the Mormons got to Utah, they were, of course, pushed west by persecution, but pulled west by this promise of greater contact with, excuse me, with Native Americans.
Yeah.
And the most powerful figure, white and non-white, in the Great Basin in the West at the time when they got to Utah, was this figure Wakara. And so in that first project, I looked at how the Latter-day Saints wrote about him, conceptualized him, used him for their own purposes,
Sure.
right? How they wrote about him on the page affected how they related to him as a person and as a member of the Ute Nation, and their broader concept of, Lamanite identity, and how they position that relationship to the broader work of settler pioneers in the West, and their relationship to the broader project of creating the American West, and eventually part of the United States.
So
So
tell us a little bit about Wakara then.
yeah,
I mean, you said certainly we have now learned about like the different names and probably
sure.
pretty typical for the Native Americans to
Yeah,
be addressed one way by one group and another by another. But tell
yeah,
us some more, some things that
yes,
we can go. All right, yeah, I
you
had
got
no
it.
idea.
So yes, thank you for that. So in this next project, what I wanted to do was kind of I showed how the Mormons understood him. My goal here was to turn. He was such a fascinating character, an important figure. I wanted to tell the story from his point of view. So Wakara was, as I argue in the book, a founding father, really a founding figure of the American West, and that most people haven't heard of.
Hmm.
And why haven't you heard of him? Because he's Native American, and that a Native person doesn't fit into our understanding of the kind of mythology of the creation of the American West. So in the 1840s, he was known across the country as the greatest horse thief of the American West. He would go from his home in central Utah around Utah Lake. He was a Timpanogos Ute, a member of that band, and he and his cavalry and other mountain men would travel along what was called the Old Spanish Trail down into California, and he would steal horses by the thousands each fall and winter in the 1840s. And
Wow.
then he'd round up those horses and bring them along that old Spanish trail, which runs from kind of San Bernardino, well, really LA, San Bernardino, and then up through the mountains and then across Nevada into Utah and then swings down into northern New Mexico. And he would move those horses and sell them along the old Spanish Trail, mostly though to New Mexicans. Um, and so he really was known as this greatest horse thief. Sometimes he would steal as many as 1,000 horses a time each year. He also was the most prolific enslaver of people in the American West at that time. On his way to and from California, he would pass through Paiute territory, which is, I was just talking about Cedar City and all those places. That's Paiute homeland. And he would enslave pedestrian Paiutes, people who didn't have the horse and were dominated by equestrians, and sell enslaved peoples in California and in New Mexico. And then also during this period, so I kind of argue that he was using he was providing the horse and human power to kind of help create the American West, because enslaved peoples and horses were vital to that creation. But a lot of,
Which pause real quick.
yeah,
Never heard about that. I've like in all of my life, I've never
just
heard about of that type of slavery
yep,
and people,
yeah,
moving like that. Never, literally, I'm just sort of
interesting,
mouth agape going, okay, now what? Hold on.
yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, and the Latter-day Saints have a big role to play in this story. So we'll get to that here in just a
Yeah.
second. So and it's a different. I just want to pause, and hopefully we'll get back to it. It's a different kind of when we hear the word slavery, and in fact, when I would talk to my Paiute friends initially, my Paiute friends, and I work very closely with the Paiutes and the Utes and other members of Native nations, work directly with Wakara's descendants. They helped me see that the slavery that Wakara practiced is different in kinds, but we can get back to that.
Okay.
So he also was one of the most important cartographers of the American West. He knew the American West, the Southern American West, better than anyone. He was certainly the most well-traveled man of the period. And so when famed explorers, most notably John C. Fremont, came through during his many expeditions, he met with Wakara. In fact, Wakara charged him a tribute to cross his lands. And Wakara described to Fremont and others the best watering holes, the best mountain passes, and the notes that Fremont took in his encounters with Wakara, he eventually took back to Washington, D.C., and made the maps that eventually that created the image of the West in the East, people in the East's mind, including the Latter-day Saints. He used John C. Fremont's maps that Wakara helped build or helped make to get to Utah.
Okay.
So really an influential, I call him like unacknowledged, but a really important cartographer. And then the Latter-day Saints get to Utah, right? And I'll talk about what I mean by him being a founder of Utah. But when the Latter-day Saints get to Utah, he's the most powerful person in the Great Basin. And so Brigham Young and Wakara have this friendship, and they're sometimes friends, sometimes foes at different points in their relationship between 1847 and 1855, when Wakara dies under some mysterious circumstances. So I'll pause there, and then if you and then before I dive into the kind of Mormon Wakara relationship.
Yeah. It strikes me, first of all, just like I mentioned, here is this very clearly just important, dynamic person, this
Yep.
character from history that, because of who he was, we
Yep.
don't hear about.
Yep.
That is a disappointing thing for me, even now, to look at, and then to know, this sort of appropriation, like, yeah, I did those maps probably,
Yep.
with Fremont being like, yeah, here you go,
Yep.
go ahead and did that. The credit goes that way. It's just a thing, to me, that I feel like it's so vital about the work that you and others do to go,
Mm.
hold on, this narrative has been taught,
Yep.
but there is so much more, and it makes it a richer and more full, complete picture to go, okay, yeah, the Latter-day Saints coming west, that was important, and
Absolutely.
also It
Yep.
wasn't that no one had ever been there west
That's right.
before, like sometimes the narrative goes. It's people have been coming for years and years
Yep.
and knew about this basin. There was this valley, these people, all of these things.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think that is really important. And I really like what you're saying there. And I think it's really helpful. Sometimes we're taught, I think, some people believe we have to be scared. We're, if we know about this history, we'll be ashamed of it.
Hmm.
I don't think that's the case. I think, as you said, it makes it richer. It makes it more interesting. Um, and and it also helps inform us, and this is kind of what I argue about at the end of the book. I'm a settler descended person, right? I'm not a Native American, so
Hmm.
I'm, I'm thinking about my own positionality in these things. But I can, because I know about the past now, and including my own family history, right? I'm a descendant of, as I write about in the books, of people who killed Indians and displaced Indians and made fortunes out of
Yeah.
it. I know that directly from the genealogical work I've done. But I can, instead of feeling, self-flagellating, oh, I'm such a horrible person. No, I didn't do that, but I am implicated in that history, and that's the language I use, borrowing from Native scholars who call us to realize that we are part of this history. Right, the past is not past; it's still with us, and we can do better, including telling these stories, these more accurate, colorful stories. Right, Wakara, as one of my mentors and person I've really worked closely on this book, Rena Pickavit, who's a member of, she's an elder associated with the Kanash band of Paiutes, has said to me, Wakara was a great man, maybe not a good one,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
And it's his humanity that I'm trying to recover. Just like Brigham, a great man who did some great things, admirable things, also did some things, sometimes in order to do those admirable things,
Sure.
or justified to do those admirable things, not so good from our perspective today. And we can admire these people in the past and appreciate them and study them, and understand them in their full humanity. And that's the work I'm trying to do with Wakara here.
Yeah. Let's take a break. When we come back in the second block, I want to know that interaction with the LDS people in the Great Basin, the Salt Lake Valley. Let's talk about that coming back in the second block of the Cultural Hall.
This Christmas, give a gift that celebrates what matters most. At Latter Day 3D Studio, you'll find beautifully crafted temple snowflakes. These one-of-a-kind ornaments capture the beauty of sacred temples in every intricate design. Pair them with our other Christ-centered decor to bring warmth and meaning to your home. Each piece is 3D printed with care and inspired by faith. As a special to Cultural Hall listeners, get an extra 10% off when you use the promo code Cultural Hall at checkout. Discover the perfect Christmas gift, where faith meets craftsmanship. Go to latterdaytreedstudio.com.
Here in the second block of the Cultural Hall, remember you can always send us an email, contact@theculturalhall.com. If you've been reading a book, you've read an essay, you got a magazine, there's something and you're like, oh man, this is something that I would love to hear a discussion about, you can always recommend a great guest for the Cultural Hall. If you feel like you would be that guest, you can set it up that way as well. Contact@theculturalhall.com. Put guest or feedback or whatever in the subject line so I know what it is. Know also, too, that if you send us an email, likely I will share that on the show. So contact@theculturalhall.com. What I love about this, and we started getting into this before we took the quick break, is that I think that history makes us paint people as two-dimensional characters. Like Native Americans especially were like, sort of ignorant and like, oh, what is all this, that you white people are bringing to us, and, rudimentary, crude language, blah, blah, blah. And you find out that it's like, no, this is the guy, for all intents and purposes, running a great business, being in charge of this whole thing. And then, to your point, also bringing in Brigham Young, that it's like also a phenomenal leader who, there were some things that you kind of go, I don't know. I don't know that I like all of that. We are complicated human beings, and I think we do ourselves a great disservice when we go, yeah, that guy good, those guys bad, they did this, only this. And so I appreciate the light that you're bringing to that. How, with the Latter-day Saints known to be coming west, and
Mhm.
this sort of being the area, was there a, send this along to Wakara, we're on our way, we'll see you
Mm.
soon. How did
Yes.
that relationship begin?
Terrific. Yeah, terrific question. So, like I mentioned, they're using the Latter-day Saints, especially. Let's talk about Brigham Young's Vanguard Company, that famed company of about 100 people entering the valley. As your listeners will know, famously on July 24th, 1847, right? And I'll talk about that, right? So the mythology, remember, I'm working on kind of two fronts here. We're working on two fronts where the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, which we kind of call myths. And when I say myths, I don't mean things that are not true, but the stories of our origins.
Sure.
And that is one very, the most, one of the origin myths of, Mormon Utah is that moment. And right, Brigham is in Emigration Canyon. He rises up from a sick bed, and he looks over the valley and he says, "This is the place, right?
This is the right place.
This is the right place,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
The right place, the place that God had set apart to make saints, and which is almost many scholars have argued, and almost most likely apocryphal. He would say those kind of things later about that moment. We don't have evidence that he actually pronounced that
Sure.
prophetic statement on July 24th, 1847. But that is part of the mythology. Well, actually, right, and he said, that's about the Salt Lake Valley. Actually, just a few days before, he was up with Jim Bridger at Jim Bridger's outpost in southern Wyoming, right? And for good or ill, Jim Bridger has been kind of returned to the popular imagination because of that Netflix show American Primeval, which is a very problematic portrayal of what happened after Mountain Meadows. Anyway, but Jim Bridger is a key figure in that. Well, Brigham and crew have a meeting with Jim Bridger just a few days, weeks before they head in, finally enter Utah. And they tell Jim Bridger, "Oh, our plan is to go to Utah Lake," what was then Timpanogos Lake. Why? Well, wouldn't you? It's where all the fish are, all the grass is, all the game is. It's the richest place in the Great Basin, and everyone who had come through, explorers, or for the last century, had their eyes widened when they saw the potential of creating various outposts. The Mexicans, Americans, all really fell in love with the most beautiful, most watered place in the Great Basin, which is around Utah Lake. But Jim Bridger warned them, Brigham, if you go down to Utah Lake, Timpanogos Lake, the Utes are there. We don't have record to say Wakara is there, right? But Jim Bridger, because Wakara, or the Utes were Wakara in terms of power, Jim Bridger warned them, they'll run you out. If they don't run you out, they'll kill you. Because there was a small group, right, of 100 people. And so, and they relocated their plan to settle in Salt Lake Valley, which is kind of an in-between. It was an in-between territory between the Shoshone people to the north and the Utes to the south. So I kind of joke, but Wakara, in a lot of ways, decided where the center stake of Zion was, not just Brigham and Heavenly Father, right? So he has an influence on the founding, and then. From that moment when they enter the valley, 1847, Wakara is actually at the first official Pioneer Day celebration 2 years later in 1849 as the invited guest, right? Brigham understood, and that was the plan, right? The early Mormons believed their mandate was to bring the Book of Mormon back to the Native Americans, who were understood as Lamanites at the time, and with the Lamanites, the kind of members of the restored church would covenant together.
Yep.
They would build religious covenants, trade covenants, and marriage covenants, and together they build New Jerusalem to await Christ's return. So they were interested in always interested in missionizing Native Americans from 1830 and certainly into the 1840s, 50s, etc. So Wakara was there as the celebrated guest. With many of his family, members of his lodges. Just before that meeting and after, Wakara helped Brigham make plans to begin settling outside the Salt Lake Valley. So Wakara actually is a founder of Manti. San Pete Valley, Wakara is a founder of those settlements. He brought them Mormons up there and to have them settle there. And he did so. Again, Wakara is not a great man, or he's a great man, not a good one, to help displace his rivals, his Native American rivals. So he used the Mormons to fight his own battles. The same thing happened with the Timpanogos. Now, Wakara was a Timpanogos, Ute, but he had a falling out with the Timpanogos because of a kind of a succession crisis. And so one thing that's also not told is, one of the worst massacres that happens, actually an extermination order against the Timpanogos, which is an interesting word because, right, Mormons left America under an extermination order against the Timpanogos in Provo, which in February 1850, the huge massacre of Timpanogos peoples, 50 to 60 outright killed, another probably 100 killed through exposure and disease. And Wakara actually told Brigham in their correspondence, he was actually up in Manti while the fighting was happening, helping set up that community. You should have killed more. He was happy with it because, again, he wanted to use the Mormons to displace his rivals around the lake. So that's the start of their relationship.
For clarity's sake, just want to make sure that I'm picking up the pieces that you're offering. The extermination order was issued by the LDS members, the leaders, to say we need these guys kill them, kill the Timpanogos.
The Nauvoo Legion.
Okay,
right. There was a meeting. Parley P. Pratt came back from his first exploration of the kind of central and southern Utah, which Wakara and his brothers helped arrange, right? He came back and there had been some fighting, some skirmishes down at the Fort Utah settlement, where Provo is today, or near where Provo is today. And they were deciding how to handle these conflicts with the local Timpanogos down there, and they decided to kill the men and keep the women and children. Right, that was the idea. They'd kill the men and keep the women and children as servants, slaves, eventually perhaps wives, etc. So Wakara was a partner in that work. Right, one of the ways that one of the big stories I tell is about the slave practices that Wakara had been practicing for years, and Native peoples have been practicing for years. It's different, though, than when we say slavery, the kind of bondage or the chattel slavery that was practiced in the American South, right? Wakara's slavery was certainly sometimes as extractive, as violent, kind of inhumane as that slavery. But as I argue in the book, it was always about re-establishing bonds of peoplehood and bond to the land, right? And that's really what it means to be a Native person, is you're bounded as a people, bound together as a people, and bounded together to the land. So, Wakara, his slaves, yes, he'd trade them, sell them to make profit, use them to do labor, but some of them became kin. Some of them became wives. And this is a fairly common practice among kind of Native understandings of bondage. So while he's up in Manti in March 1850, he actually is baptized a Latter-day Saint. He's baptized by Isaac Morley, with whom he founded the Manti settlement. And he leads, a few weeks later, another 100 of his own followers, Wakara does, into the baptismal waters. And so he's a baptized member of the church. And a year later, he becomes probably the first ordained Native person in the priesthood. So the Mormons see him as a partner in their building of Zion, in their partnership in also bringing Native people into their community and making them, to borrow the phrase that's no longer in the Book of Mormon, but was at the time, white and delightsome, a white and delightsome people. And so he was a partner in that work.
Let me interject something real quick. So do you make any case or argument was because Wakara, obviously a very smart person to be able to partner with the Latter-day Saints as far as this goes, was his conversion a conversion of like convenience and power? Is there any sort of record that would let us know, like, he is doing this because it ensures that he's going to continue to live, or is it a burning inside as we hear conversion for other people that are like, man, this is what he wanted to do?
Yeah, I don't use the word conversion in the book, right? The Latter-day Saints saw it as a conversion.
Sure.
Right. Isaac Morley up in Manti is sending letters back to Brigham. Oh, the day of the Lamanite has arrived. They were so excited that the most powerful man, including Brigham at the time in the West, had joined with them. They saw it as, yes, what we understand as conversion, right? Kind of, leaving behind your old ways and fully adopting this new belief system. That's not how Wakara saw it. He saw it. I don't have any written evidence of this, but based on how scholars like my dear friend Lynn Fisher, who studies Native quote unquote conversions, when Native people adopt Christianity, the language we use is association.
Okay.
So it's an additive thing, right? It's additive, not a replacing. So yeah, Wakara was interested in building kin networks of trade, of religion, if you want to, he wouldn't use that word, but religion, and also family, right? One of the big interventions, one of the big discoveries that we made in the book, that Wakara even placed his, again, about slavery, right? How slavery, this bondage, is always about bonding people together and to the land. He placed his own daughters in Mormon households in Manti, two of his own daughters. And through the great work of genealogists using DNA and also genealogy, we've shown that. And, this is how, people around the world have done it for years with hey, a powerful family and another powerful family want to bond themselves together for trade, for politics, so they don't kill each other. Hey, you give me your kids, I'll give you our kids, and we'll marry them together or whatever, right? And Wakara also wanted and expected a Mormon children. Now he didn't get them. He also always wanted a wife, a Mormon wife, and it becomes kind of a laugh line, actually. But of course, during this time, the Latter-day Saints are marrying Native women, in their as plural wives. But these two women, these two of Wakara's daughters, become matriarchs of huge families. Wakara is uncommon. I won't say unique here, but uncommon that he has a lot of descendants, right? Including people who probably among your listeners don't even know they're directly related to Wakara.
Yeah.
Unless they've done their DNA, because their genealogy will tell them one story. But if they've done their DNA and it pops up, how am I, whatever, 136, whatever it is, Native American, I would, come talk to us, because perhaps you might be a descendant of Wakara and you don't even know it. So Wakara has 1,000, maybe 2,000 living descendants, mostly among the Northern Utes and Paiutes, but descendants among, kind of your typical Latter-day Saint in Utah who might not even know that. So he is partnering all the time with the Latter-day Saints. But he doesn't act. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, so you mentioned though probably the first Native American elder within, and we say elder because that applies both in Native American, but in the Mormon tradition, the first Native American priesthood holder. Talk to me about that, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so in 1851, he, along with some of his brothers and other Ute leaders, were ordained by Brigham. And yeah, they were the first, most likely the earliest natives in Utah who are ordained priesthood holders, right? And so, as Latter-day Saints know, right, the priesthood is a key part of membership in the church. It's a lay church, right? All males, most males, starting the age of 12, get various priests. The two priests get one of the two first priesthoods. So really important. And again, during that same period, they even gave him what I kind of describe as a traveling paper. Now, Wakara wasn't literate in our sense. He was he wasn't lettered is what actually I say. I think of him as literate because he could draw things on paper or draw things even there are some great scenes. We have him drawing things on riverbanks to make maps. So he understood like symbols and right. But he didn't know how to write. In fact, we have one time there's an amazing document where we have him attempting to write. He like a little kid would write a little, pretends to write. He's not a little kid. He's a very sophisticated person. So he speaks Spanish, all the native languages. He speaks broken English, probably better English than not. So he's a very cosmopolitan person. But yeah, so he's a priesthood holder, and they give him a traveling paper. that says he's going to pass through all these settlements that, as many of them, he helped found. He helps found Parowan down in southern Utah, right? He wants to place Mormons in spots where he can sell horses and slaves to. And in fact, this traveling paper given to him by George A. Smith, one of the founders of Parowan, says that Wakara can travel around to the settlements and that the settlers, the pioneers, should trade with him in buckskins and horses and Paiute, which is Paiute children, right? So they're partnering with him. But the Latter-day Saints, and again, you haven't heard of slavery, right? Again, it's not slavery in the chattel bondage sense. Sure. Paul Reeve and his co-authors have just come out with a great book called Abominable Slavery, which looks at mostly African American slavery in Utah. But the real concern of slavery for the Latter-day Saints, and the first laws passed were about Native American slavery, Indian slavery in the territory. And the Latter-day Saints really wanted to take over it from Wakara, right? That's my argument. Not to get rid of it, they wanted to take over it. And what Brigham told people in Parowan in 1850, I believe, right after Parowan was founded, buy up all the Lamanite children as fast as you can. And his plan was to buy them into freedom. At least that's what they said. And that they'd become children of the household, often serve as servants, maybe become plural wives, right? Slavery was used as a way to remove women and children from Native communities. War was a way that they'd get rid of men from the land and kind of assimilate them into the culture. So, but the law passed. One of the earliest laws allowed the Latter-day Saints to recoup the cost of that purchase in indentured servitude. So there are these kind of amazing and kind of unbelievable moments where the law required that if you had a Native child, you'd had to go to your local magistrate and deliver a plan for indentured servitude that the purchaser of an enslaved person and the enslaved person had agreed to. So you have like 3-year-olds who are ostensibly agreeing to be indentured servants. The slavery isn't the right word, right? Or it's more complicated than we think. Sure. But certainly, it's not free. These people weren't necessarily free as we would consider it. So Wakara and Brigham really were fighting over land, right? If Wakara is taught in the curriculum in public schools about the Walker War, and that's what as we kind of move towards the end here, if anything, people know about the Walker War. And it's one of the many kind of skirmishes in Utah history kind of related to Native Americans. But the work I show is that we shouldn't call it Walker's War. We really should call it Brigham's War. And I argue that from the beginning, Brigham understood that he would have to kill more Native Americans than he would be able to kind of bring into the community. And like I said, their plan explicitly was when he and the other brethren, including Parley P. Pratt, met on that snowy day in 1850, January 1850, before that Timpanogos massacre, that they'd kill their plan was to kill, and this is actually Parley's words, it's not mine, kill the men and keep the women and children and do what we want with them, right? That was their plan. So they'd use slavery, a form of slavery, to remove Native peoples, Native women and children from the land, and war to kill off Native men. And starting with that Timpanogos, even before, but really with that Timpanogos massacre in 1850, Brigham sent out the Nauvoo Legion, right? Along with missionaries, they're also sending out the Nauvoo Legion to fight these fights. And what I show, whether it's against the Goshutes in 1851, 1852, with the Utes in 1853 with Wakara, and really up until the 1920s with the Posey War in around what is now Moab and Blanding, Utah. Some great scholarship done by the Ute Mountain Utes down there, showing that really important history. And what I try to show is that this is actually how Americans become American, is fighting Native Americans, fighting and killing Indians. Even connecting, again, genealogy is so important. What I do is I trace Brigham's ancestry all the way back to his ancestor, one of his first ancestors in the New World, who fought in one of the first Indian wars, the King Philip's War against the Wampanoags. It's we're taping this on the day before Thanksgiving, right? The Wampanoags were supposedly the folks who helped, have the first Thanksgiving dinner with the Pilgrims. Well, Brigham Young's ancestor participated in in the King Philip's War, and what that establishes, and what really happens though, what I show is that settlers move in to native territory. Usually there's some kind of a time of trying to attempted partnership. And then eventually though, the settlers grow, take land. A fight ensues, right? Whoever starts it, who knows, but it's the settlers who come first and like take the land, are taking the land. But the settlers, because they have the power to write things down, right? They have as a little Marxist here, but the means of production of history. They have the power to write and describe and how these conflicts occur. They get to name who is the aggressor, who is the innocent, who is the Christian, who is the savage. Yeah. And in the naming of it, we even just take it for granted. It's always the Indians' War, right? King Philip's War, right? Who was a Wampanoag. The Comanche War, the Cherokee Wars. All the wars are named after the Indians as if they are the aggressors, whereas it's the settlers come in and causing the aggression. And so what I wanted to do, calling it Brigham's War, was to point out that it's not unique to the Latter-day Saints, but the Latter-day Saints are certainly use this very American practice of not only moving into a place, taking land, having a conflict, and then having the power, because they get to write things down, to name the war after the Native Americans. And the truth is, Wakara had very little to do with the Walker War. I mean, he actually didn't want to have much to do with it, but he's blamed for it. And
let's take a break here, and then I want to, in our third part, I want to talk about the demise and then ultimate death of Wakara. We'll do that. We'll come back in the third block of the Cultural Hall. Let me take just a moment to tell you all about bestdjinutah.com. That is the website where you can learn all about me. Oh, sure, you probably feel like you know me, but you know me in the Cultural Hall sense. I have a DJ company, now 6 of us strong, great event hosts, MCs, and DJs that can be able to make whatever event you have coming up absolutely spectacular, and hope you will reach out to us. Now you're thinking, well, wait a minute, Richie, I don't live in Utah. Would you travel? Absolutely, I would travel. Would they travel? Absolutely, they would travel. Whatever your event is, doesn't have to be a wedding or a community event. We can do all sorts of things. I can teach you line dancing. I can dance with you. We can do partner dancing. We can do all kinds of things, but we can't do any of it if you don't hit me up. You can go to bestdjinutah.com. You can fill out the form to get more information or get a quote, and then I will get right back to you. Find out why I'm so busy and why sometimes we don't get episodes of the Cultural Hall. It's all because of bestdjinutah.com. Here in the third block of the Cultural Hall, remember you can become a Patreon saint of the Cultural Hall, and encourage you to do so. That helps us to be able to continue to do the show. Go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. It's putting your money where your ears are. Little as $5 a month, and it helps us out a bunch. Plus, you get to be a part of the secret but not sacred Facebook group where all the Patreon saints are hanging out. Go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. It's difficult in a situation like this because I could sit and listen, because these are things that I have no idea. I mean, if you were like, tell me what you know about Wakara at the beginning, it's literally that there is a street, and I probably could have, assumed that it was a Native American person, and that ends. You're like, you probably know about the Walker War. Nope. You probably know about the this. Nuh-uh. None of these things. So to be able to listen to it, we are attempting to go, here's a whole life of a dynamic, pivotal person, and we're going to just squish it into an hour's worth of time. There is obviously a demise with Wakara and the LDS people at some point, or certainly he passes. I'd love to jump there.
Yeah. Well, and if you want more on this story, you want to hear more about the story, Wakara's America, the life and legacy of a native founder of the American West, which is makes a great holiday gift. And yes,
Yeah, link for
so
it in the show notes so people can
terrific.
easily buy it. Do you have an audiobook that people can
It's
listen to?
coming. It's coming.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Okay.
Yep. So yeah. So there's this war, um, and it's called, it's named as the Walker War, and it's amazing to see. I very carefully, um, following some great work by others, um, very carefully show kind of track the kind of various fightings of it, but also how quickly Brigham is naming the war, not only for himself, the Walker War, not only for his people, but also nationally, right? He wants it known that in fighting Wakara, he's helping to fight for America, right? Again, the Latter-day Saints are certainly are different from, but also a part of this kind of this manifest destiny, right? And we always want to keep that, like, they're unique. They're a unique case study, but also part of the American story. So between the war goes from about 1853 to 1854 for about 10 months, and it's a set of skirmishes that start out with, there was a fish deal, kind of. Wakara's people were fish eaters. And actually, again, another reason why Wakara and the Timpanogos should be not unlike the Wampanoags in Massachusetts, who helped save those pilgrims, were it not for the fish that Wakara had carefully, and his people had carefully managed, the saints probably would have starved to death, the early saints, because all their crops died, right? They didn't know how to farm in Utah. They would eventually learn how to. But so these farmers became fish eaters, really, and ate too many fish, actually. And the real fight actually was over that land, right? It was over control over the kind of fishing, and beautiful land in and around Utah Lake. It was a land fight. So a fish deal goes bad. A Timpanogos Ute, a member of Wakara's community, has a dispute about getting flour, which they increasingly relied on, the Utes, trading with how much flour some fish would fetch them. Anyway, a fight ensues, and what happens? The war really is a series of revenge moments. Wakara's people kill some settlers in response to that fish deal gone bad, which had caused the death of 2 Utes, and then the Mormons attack the Utes, they attack other people, right? And it's just kind of revenge cycle. Well, it ends with Brigham and Wakara meeting in 1854 near Nephi, Utah, and they have a kind of a peace parlay, and they agree, Wakara agrees that, and Brigham agrees that they'd Wakara would be able to sell his slaves, sell his horses, to the saints without the Mormons stopping Wakara. But within 6 months, he dies. He's down in Parowan in December 1854 and early January 1855. And we didn't tell this story. We were talking about the fish a little bit, but every year Wakara and all the Utes from central Utah would gather at Utah Lake, Timpanogos Lake, Utah Lake, for a fish festival. It's their homeland, right? It's their sacred center, and they would eat the fish during the spawning season, and they were very careful which fish to eat and which not. Anyway, but Wakara, for some reason, and his lodges, he's down by Parowan because he has a relationship with Parowan people, and he moves north suddenly. We don't know why, right? It's out of season, but I kind of argue that he's trying to get home, right? He knows he's sick, and he heads north and eventually dies. And I'm not going to say exactly where. It's near Fillmore. I'm not going to say exactly where he dies and where he's buried because of all the grave robbing that has happened to his and other Utes' remains. But during that war, Brigham sends him a pretty interesting note that says, you are fighting again. They're always corresponding. You are fighting against your best friends. Why would you ever do this? I'm sending you some tobacco, and they often would smoke tobacco. Again, different time,
Sure.
different time. Send tobacco for you to smoke, so you can have good feelings. But if you're scared of the tobacco, have one of your prisoners smoke it, so you'll know that it's good. And Brigham during that war, one of the things that Brigham did was poison things, poison water, poison food with arsenic, with strychnine. This is, it was a total war against the natives. And Brigham has been accused of using poison at other points. So we don't know if Wakara died of poison or if it was some kind of communicable disease, but he dies in January 29th, 1855, and has a pretty amazing burial that I describe as both horrifying and tantalizing the settlers. When he dies, he has horses killed, wives killed, enslaved people killed. He's buried with all his stuff, his saddles, his fishing gear. A letter from Brigham Young is laid on his chest with all his stuff. And, I think from Wakara's perspective, what he's trying to do is preserve his world in miniature, right? Mm-hmm. And make a claim. And it's, from our perspective and from that perspective, pretty horrible, killing people. But he's trying to preserve his world in miniature. Unfortunately, the end of my book shows how another part of Americans dominating, controlling the West is not only killing Native Americans in the 1870s, and during the Indian Wars, but collecting crania that they bring back to Washington, D.C. for studies. The idea was that they'd take the measurements of crania, the volume of various crania, Native Americans mostly, but also African Americans, all people around the world. And the idea was the larger the crania volume, the more intelligent. And lo and behold, Anglo-Saxons had the largest crania. Some Native Americans kind of had middle size. African Americans, not just Africans, but African Americans had the smallest. Now, this is all bunk.
Yeah.
There's no scientific backing of this, but this was the science of the day. And so Wakara's grave was robbed by members of the U.S. Army that were sent west to collect specimens of native things and also flora and fauna, right? Kind of trying to preserve the American West before it was, the old American West before it was changed forever by settlers. And they were studied, quote unquote studied. And unfortunately, they still remain at the Smithsonian. And I work very closely with Wakara's direct descendants, especially Forrest Kutch, who's an elder of the Northern Ute tribe, the Ute tribe of Indians, and working to imagine what it would mean to return his skull to his homeland. But the problem is his homeland, and again, I'm not saying where it is. It's very readily available to figure out where the burial site is. And unfortunately, I'm not going to tell this story, but read the book. It's not the last time that grave robbing episode was not the last time it was robbed. Unfortunately, the very people, including in very recent memory, even the last 10 years, the very people charged with protecting that space have been doing grave robbing. So this story, this violence against Wakara's memory and Wakara's people continues, right? The idea also was not only would they remove the native remains from the land, doing so, again, Wakara buried his stuff there, his world in miniature, to make a claim to the land, right? Mm-hmm. That's what we do in some ways with burial grounds. We're saying these are our people and this is our land. And by removing native people from their burial grounds, and people have been doing this literally since the Pilgrims, another thing Americans did, the Pilgrims did it, Thomas Jefferson did it. Removing native people from the land means they weren't there. Yeah. That's not their land. And so, but it's the hopeful story, again, is what I call for and what I'm observing is that Wakara's stories, as you are doing, and I thank you for your interest in this story, is that this history is returning. Instead of thinking history as a straight line moving one way, we can see history, and I credit my Ute mentors to help me think that history really is a season, a cycle. Mm-hmm. And we are moving, we were in a period where Native people had been forgotten. Native history has been lost. Native understandings of land, right, and how to be in relationship to land had been put to the side. But we're now entering a period where Native history is returning, Native ideas, indigenous, I'll say actually probably a better word to use, indigenous ideas are returning. Look what's happening right now with the Great Salt Lake. Mm-hmm. I always joke that my real religion is skiing. So I study things in Utah so I can go to Alta and ski. Well, I pay attention to the snowpack then, right? And that's directly related to the Great Salt Lake. The very poison that Wakara was perhaps poisoned with, like arsenic, heavy metals, etc., are being exposed as the Great Salt Lake shrinks, right? And getting kicked up in these huge dust storms. Well, luckily, people are realizing this growth of settlers in the Great Basin isn't sustainable,
Right.
because we're just taking all the water. So we're looking towards native understanding. So I created my dear friend Darren Perry, who's a Shoshone elder, and Forrest and others who are showing that, hey, we need to have a different relationship that isn't just extractive from the land, from the water, from the animals, but it has to has some kind of balance. And guess what? That indigenous way of seeing the world is better for indigenous people, obviously better for settler descended people, right? And I'm hopeful that that understanding of an indigenous way of being in relationships with the land, which is which sees us as humans not apart from nature, but a part of nature, right? And not centering ourselves, but seeing ourselves in relationship to land more than human animals, like the June sucker down in Utah Lake, which another coalition of BYU, Utah Valley scientists, and Native people are restoring, understanding that precious fish, the better the fish does, and which was one of the favorite fish of the Timpanogos, the better the whole ecosystem will do. So this idea of restoring history, stories, people, and also people and more than human animals and ideas and ways of being in relationship, hopefully can lead to more healthy, more honest, and more sustainable futures.
Yeah. An important work that's been done by you, and I know you'll continue to do and share these stories. I'm excited to know. I actually have a question about that, but I want to let people know. Wakara is America, the life and legacy of a native founder of the American West. You can find a link to it in the show notes. Also, we have had previous conversations with Paul Reeve. We'll leave a link for that. And with Darren Perry. He's been to the Cultural Hall a couple times. Be warned that one of the episodes with Darren Perry is all about the Bear River Massacre, and it is not easy listening.
No.
We go all into that as we chat with him. It's important, and I don't want to discourage anyone from listening to it, but it is another one of these instances where you go, wait, what?
Yep.
Moment after moment as you hear him share that. So be able to check that out. I'm optimistic as we look at a new presiding bishopric of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and their environmental kind of returning to the land concerns. Bishop Waddell, excited to see what he brings. And certainly if the church or people are going to be able to remain living in the Salt Lake Valley, things will have to be different from how they presently are. Max, we ask everyone who steps into the Cultural Hall I technically ask 3 questions. You're not a member of the church. You're sort of Mormon adjacent. I'll call you a Powder Day saint.
Oh, love it.
Because you like the skiing.
Yep.
But we do ask everyone and ask them to interpret it however they may. So I'll ask you that question what is your favorite part of your faith?
That's a terrific question. Yeah. I mean, you and I, before turning on, going online, I was joking that I say to my dear Latter-day Saint friends, of whom I have many, I have a testimony of your testimony. And if you want to baptize me after I'm got, please go ahead. I actually, there's a great phrase that us religionists use, more theologians. I have holy envy, right? Like something that's holy but envious. I love the idea of prophecy baptism. It needs to be used, it's a complicated history, but I think it's really generous. It's one of the most brilliant things that Joseph came up with, solving one of the most important problems in Christianity, how to bring people who didn't hear the gospel or didn't live during the gospel times into community if they want to, right? Yes. That's the agency aspect. So what's the part of, most important part of my faith? Let's see. I would say, it's the opportunity to actually, this. I think we're doing we're practicing our faith right now, which is to understand humans as fallible, limited in vision, sometimes selfish, but have this capacity, if we're open up to it, to great generosity, great understanding. And I think one of the things that I find that enactment is in kind of community, especially with people who are very different from us. So, all of my books cross boundaries of faith, of religion, of race, sometimes of nationality. And I find right in those moments, right, I think that's where the divine exists, in those moments where folks who are different for various reasons interact as fellow humans, as as if you wish, all kind of created in the image of God. All are alike unto God, to borrow from the Latter-day Saint scripture.
Yeah. Well said. I know that people like yourself always have something burning in the back of their brain. Like,
Yeah.
I know that this book has just come out and you are talking to people and sharing the message, and that is fantastic. But I also, even though we don't know each other well, I know that you have got to have something where you're like, and I can't wait to sink my teeth into telling people about, what is that thing that you're excited
Yeah. Well, I'm starting very briefly, I'm starting a new series in the University of Utah Press, where I'm the series editor. It's called Homelands of the American West. So we're writing very short books, like very, very short books of sacred spaces, and I've already mentioned my sacred space is Alta. So I'm going to write about Alta, this area. But yeah, I'm starting a bunch of new projects. One of the projects I will speak to is kind of my own book project, is a history kind of and contemporary kind of taking stock of this idea of land back. So I'm kind of speaking around it. But a land back is a movement, an indigenous movement, which looks to return land that was stolen, and I use those words advisedly, from Native peoples, treaties broken, etc., taken without volition. And what does it? How? From a settler's perspective, right? How we can see land back as not taking our land, right? But restoring our relationships to the land in relationship to the historical people whose land we own, right? And interestingly, churches are some of the first kind of communities who own land and are looking around to say, hey, this doesn't fit with our understanding of justice, understanding of fairness, understanding the gospel. We got this land; it was ill-begotten. How do we make amends? And so that's kind of the larger project. How that really starts. In fact, there are times almost since the 17th century, and certainly up to the present, where as America, it's kind of a counter history of America's manifest destiny of settlers taking native land. Well, always to show that this wasn't always from that whole history. People have been aware of the injustice, and also just like it's not good for anybody. Actually, it's better if we share the land, which is an indigenous way of understanding. From the beginning, there's been a push against this idea of manifest destiny, and I hope it's coming more and more into being in these days, like we talked about around the Great Salt Lake and Utah Lake and other spaces.
That's incredible. Look forward to it. I thank you for your time. Our time has expired as far as we go. Again, people can get a link to purchase the book. If you have been fascinated as I have been, you can check that out and pick it up for yourself, and also be able to listen to those other interviews that we mentioned. We hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body, that if you are not healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you will be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, go Tar Heels! Chris at Alpine Lakes Travel, Debbie Wanless, Chocolate Cake Bites Podcast, and the Tiger with a U will be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.
Save me a seat, it's sure to be neat on the back row. We really gotta go on the Cultural Hall show.